picture this. You're standing in the unforgiving, just scorching expanse of the Arabian desert,
Right?
and marching right toward you is this arrogant, heavily armored army of nearly 1,000 men.
A terrifying sight,
Yes,
honestly.
exactly. And, you look around at your own ranks and there's barely 300 men. You're lightly armed, sharing, I think, just 70 camels and exactly 2 horses.
2 horses.
I mean, logic, biology, basic military doctrine, it all screams that you should run.
Of course it does.
But today, we are exploring why they stayed. Welcome to this deep dive into a defining chapter of the life of Prophet Muhammad, the legacy of the greatest man who ever lived.
It's an incredible story.
It really is. Today, we're zeroing in on a legendary, just profoundly emotional turning point that still echoes today, the encounter at Badr. And we're basically looking at this massive collision of two entirely different sets of intentions.
Yeah, the contrast in those intentions is, it's the foundation of everything that unfolds here. Because on one side, you have the Quraysh army. They're marching out from Mecca, and they're led by a man named Abu Jahl. And his objective, it wasn't even strictly tactical. It was, deeply psychological.
Like a flex, right?
Exactly. In the tribal landscape of 7th century Arabia, perception was reality. If you looked weak, your trade routes were vulnerable. So Abu Jahl's stated goal was literally to march to Badr, camp there for 3 days, slaughter camels, feast, drink wine.
Just a giant party.
Basically, yeah. Have entertainers play music. It was a calculated vanity parade. He wanted to project this terrifying dominance across the entire region.
Wow. Okay, so it's this massive intimidation campaign just to secure their geopolitical standing.
Precisely.
But then the Muslims who are marching from Medina, they had no such grand designs. I mean, they numbered just over 300 men. They didn't set out to fight a massive, heavily armored infantry at all.
No, not at all.
Their original intention was actually highly specific. They just wanted to intercept a Quraysh caravan to reclaim wealth that had been unjustly seized from them, when they were forced out of Mecca.
Right. They were equipped for a swift interception, not a sustained war.
So how do we get from a quick interception to this legendary encounter?
Well, that gap between what the Muslims intended and what actually happened, that highlights the central theme of this whole event. It's the human plan versus a higher destiny.
Oh.
Because the caravan they were chasing actually managed to escape.
Wait, really? So the mission was over?
Exactly. From a purely strategic standpoint, the Muslims could have just packed up and gone home. But a higher power orchestrated this convergence at Badr. It was like a meeting without an appointment.
A meeting without an appointment. I like that.
Yeah, the overarching design was to force a definitive confrontation, an ultimate criterion between truth and falsehood. So this small, lightly armed group was drawn into a crucible they never even asked for.
And to really grasp the sheer scale of the disadvantage they were walking into, we have to look at how these two sides gathered intelligence on each other.
Oh, the information asymmetry here is fascinating.
It is. So the Prophet and a companion are out scouting the terrain, trying to get a read on the landscape, and they encounter this old Bedouin man in the desert.
Right, and they desperately need information.
Exactly, but they're deep in hostile territory. If they're recognized, they lose the element of surprise, or worse, they trigger the whole conflict prematurely, so they strike this for that deal.
Yeah, the old man agrees to share his intel, but only if they tell him who they are.
And the old man delivers. He provides highly accurate intelligence detailing the exact locations of both the massive Quraysh army and the smaller Muslim camp.
And he's completely unaware that he's speaking directly to the leader of the Muslims.
Right. So he fulfills his end of the bargain, pauses, and then asks the pivotal question, who are you?
And the Prophet's reply is it's brilliant situational awareness.
It is. He simply says, we are from water, and then just walks away.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at that as a Jedi mind trick level of evasion.
That's a great way to put it.
Because it's factually true. According to their faith and, just biological reality, all human beings are created from water. But it completely short-circuits the interrogator's frame of reference.
Right, the old Bedouin is just left standing there wondering if they belong to, in a specific tribe from one of the rivers in Iraq.
Exactly. It diffuses this incredibly high-stakes standoff without uttering a single lie.
It really demonstrates an incredible presence of mind under immense pressure. But, intelligence gathering in the desert, it requires multiple data points.
Sure.
So shortly after that encounter, the Muslim patrols capture a water boy, a servant belonging to the Quraysh army. and they bring him back for questioning.
I can imagine he was pretty terrified.
Oh, absolutely terrified. And when they ask him about the size of the army, he genuinely doesn't know. I mean, a water boy isn't privy to troop manifests or command structures.
Right, so asking him for a head count is basically useless.
Exactly. So the prophet pivots to logistics. He asks a highly specific, practical question. How many camels do they slaughter every day?
Oh, wow. Because an army's size is betrayed by its stomach.
Precisely. And the boy answers 9 or 10.
Okay.
And from that single metric, the prophet calculates the grim reality. Based on standard daily food consumption for a fighting force, he deduces the enemy numbers between 900 and 1,000 men.
Just from the camels.
Yeah. He extrapolates the entire threat level from their supply chain.
That is incredible. And let's break down the sheer disparity of those numbers for a second.
Please do.
So the Quraysh force consisted of 950 men. And within that, they had 200 cavalry, which are heavily armed horsemen, and 600 soldiers wearing coat mails.
Right. Heavy iron armor.
Yeah. Now look at the Muslims. They had roughly 313 to 319 men.
Barely over 300.
And like we mentioned earlier, exactly 2 horses.
Huh?
2. And only 70 camels. I mean, it's literally like an armored battalion going up against a neighborhood watch on bicycles.
That's a brutal comparison, but it's accurate. And that mathematical disadvantage translates into immediate, severe physical hardship.
Because of the lack of transport.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because they only had 70 camels for over 300 men, the Muslims had to implement a strict rotation system. Every 3 men shared a single camel. Wow. Which meant walking through the brutal heat of the desert for 2/3 of the journey. And this is where we see a really profound detail about leadership structure.
Right.
The prophet, who was in his 50s at the time, shared a camel with 2 of his companions.
And knowing the physical toll this takes, his companions naturally offer to forfeit their turns, right? They basically tell him to stay on the camel while they walk the entire way.
Yeah, but he refuses. His response to them is so revealing. He says, "You are no stronger than me, nor can I dispense with the reward more than you can." He insisted on enduring the physical punishment because he viewed the hardship as a necessary spiritual reward. By refusing the privilege of rank, he completely dissolved the hierarchy that often fractures armies under stress.
I mean, walking the hot sand right alongside them, that cemented an unparalleled, just fierce loyalty. The leader wasn't asking them to endure anything he wasn't personally suffering.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you have this tiny, physically exhausted force facing a massive, heavily armored enemy.
And human biology dictates that when you're faced with overwhelming odds of death, the sympathetic nervous system just takes over.
Flight or fight. Mostly flight in this case.
Right. Adrenaline floods the bloodstream. Panic, or at least severe anxiety, should dissolve their ranks before a sword is even drawn.
But it doesn't. And this is where the environment itself begins to interact with these 2 forces in highly unusual ways.
Okay.
A heavy rain fell over the entire area the night before the encounter.
And the physics of that rain fundamentally altered the battlefield, didn't it?
Completely. The massive Quraysh army was positioned in a lower area with softer, more loamy earth. When the heavy rain hit, it didn't just wet the ground. It turned the earth into sticky, impassable mud.
Oh, wow.
For an army burdened with heavy iron armor and hundreds of horses, that mud acted as a paralyzing agent. It basically halted their logistical movements entirely.
Wait, so the Quraysh are bogged down in mud, but the Muslims were camped on a different elevation, right? With soft sand.
Yeah.
It's like walking on a dry, beach-loose sand is exhausting to trudge through. But once a heavy rain hits it, the water compacts the granules. It turns a shifting surface into a solid, firm track.
Exactly. The weather literally flipped the mobility advantage. It neutralized the heavy cavalry and stabilized the infantry of the smaller force.
That's amazing.
But the historical texts emphasize that the rain provided more than just a firm footing. It served as a vital spiritual cleansing. It washed away the psychological whispers of doubt and the feeling of being physically vulnerable. It prepared them internally.
Which brings us to a detail that completely defies human biology. The sources describe a profound drowsiness that fell over the Muslim camp that night.
Yes, the deep sleep.
I have to express my sheer disbelief at this. If you are preparing for the most high-stakes life-or-death moment of your existence, you do not sleep.
No, your heart is pounding.
Exactly. Your mind is racing with worst-case scenarios. The idea that a camp of 300 men, knowing 1,000 heavily armed soldiers were waiting for them at dawn, just drifted into a deep, peaceful slumber. It's physiologically impossible.
Unless it's a direct intervention on the nervous system. The historical accounts view this as a clear miracle of the mind.
Right.
That sleep is interpreted as a sign of ultimate divine inner peace, a forced rest. You can look across the camp and see the men in a deep slumber.
Wow.
The physical rest was crucial for the coming exertion, sure, but overriding that crippling biological terror was the true gift. It reset their psychological state.
And while they slept, the prophet experienced a highly specific vision. In a dream, the enemy appeared to him as far fewer in number than they actually were.
The psychology behind this is so fascinating. Because if the prophet had clearly visualized the overwhelming, terrifying mass of the Quraysh army in the darkness, human nature suggests the resolve of the camp might have fractured.
Oh, definitely. They might have woken up and disputed amongst themselves about whether to just flee.
Right. Seeing the enemy as a smaller force anchored their courage for the dawn. But the phenomenon didn't only happen in a dream.
It didn't.
No, it translated to the physical battlefield.
Wait, you mean the Quraysh actually experienced the exact same perceptual distortion?
Yes. When they looked across the desert, they also saw the Muslims as incredibly few in number.
That's wild. But for an arrogant army marching out to flex its muscles, seeing an impossibly small opposition feeds directly into their hubris.
Exactly. It made the Quraysh dangerously overconfident. They assumed it would be a quick, effortless slaughter, and that overconfidence made them careless, undermining their tactical discipline.
But this physical and psychological setup only works if the actual combat tactics adapt to the reality of the numbers. I mean, when the sun rises, the spiritual peace of the night evaporates into the harsh violence of the morning.
Yes, the reality sets in.
How do 300 men actually survive the impact of 1,000?
By abandoning the traditional combat style entirely. Traditional Arab warfare at the time was heavily reliant on tribal raids. Chaotic, individual hit-and-run duels meant to showcase personal bravery while minimizing total casualties.
Big skirmishes.
Right. If the Muslims had engaged in that chaotic style, the sheer math of the Quraysh army would have swallowed them whole.
Yeah, they'd be surrounded in minutes.
The prophet recognized this, and he instituted a revolutionary tactical shift. He aligned his men in strict, disciplined ranks.
He essentially built a human wall.
A human wall, exactly.
He positioned the men with lances in the front, instructing them to kneel and angle their spears upward. And that formation is designed to break a cavalry charge because a horse won't run into a wall of sharp points.
Right.
And then he placed the archers in the back to provide a constant barrage of covering fire.
They fought as a single, unified organism. This level of lock-shield discipline completely short-circuited the Quraysh's combat strategies.
Because they weren't used to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The larger army was used to breaking into individual melees, but they repeatedly crashed into this impenetrable, organized structure.
But, a structure is only as strong as the conviction of the men holding the spears. And the individual resolve on that battlefield is just staggering.
There's one story that really highlights that.
The man with the dates?
Yes. There's a moment where a man is standing in the ranks, literally eating a handful of dates to sustain his energy.
Okay.
And a call rings out, announcing the promise of paradise for those who stand firm and fight with conviction. He hears this, looks down at the dates in his hand, and experiences this radical shift in his perception of time.
He realizes that waiting to finish his meal would make his life too long.
Yeah. He tosses the dates aside and immediately rushes forward into the fray.
The sheer conviction required to view a few minutes of chewing food as an unbearable delay to your destiny. It's profound. It demonstrates an absolute certainty in what awaits him.
It really does.
Yeah.
Yet, as awe-inspiring as that conviction is, we have to look at the deeply human, tragic reality of this encounter, too.
Yeah, that's important.
Because this wasn't a battle against faceless invaders from a distant land. These were people who shared lineage. They grew up together in Mecca.
Right. They were connected by blood, former friendships, these deeply tangled histories.
Exactly. And nowhere is the agony of that civil conflict more visceral than in the story of Umayyah.
Umayyah was a prominent Quraysh leader, right? But he originally had no desire to march to Badr.
He didn't. He was essentially coerced. Abu Jahl publicly insulted his manhood and shamed him until he felt socially forced to join the army.
And in the chaos of the battlefield, Umayyah and his son are captured by a Muslim named Abd al-Rahman.
Right.
And before the ideological split that tore their society apart, Umayyah and Abd al-Rahman had been close friends.
They even had a standing arrangement to protect each other's property and business interests in their respective territories.
Wow.
So Abd al-Rahman captures them with the intent of securing them as prisoners of war for ransom. He is actively trying to navigate the rules of war to keep his old friend alive.
But then Bilal sees them.
Yes.
And for context, Bilal was a formerly enslaved man who had embraced the new faith early on. And because of his beliefs, he was subjected to horrific, prolonged torture in the scorching Meccan sun.
Awful torture.
And the man who owned him, who orchestrated and personally carried out that unimaginable cruelty, was Umayyah.
Yeah. The immense weight of that unresolved trauma violently collides with Abd al-Rahman's attempt to honor an old friendship.
It's a collision of two completely different worlds.
Bilal recognizes his former torturer and raises the alarm. He calls out to the other Muslims that the head of disbelief must not survive, and Abd al-Rahman desperately tries to de-escalate the situation.
But it devolves into a desperate physical struggle. Abd al-Rahman realizes he can't stop the incoming men, so he literally throws his own body over Umayyah, trying to shield him from the swords.
He even suffers a severe injury to his foot while trying to protect the man who tortured his new brother in faith.
It's so intense.
But the trauma and the demand for absolute justice in that moment overpower the old tribal loyalties. Umayyah perishes right there beneath his old friend.
It strips away any romanticized view of the encounter, you know? It shows the agonizing, messy reality of a society tearing itself apart.
Absolutely. And that heartbreaking complexity extend far past the clash of swords. After the Quraysh ranks finally break and retreat, the bodies of 24 of their prominent leaders are gathered and placed into a dry, abandoned well on the battlefield.
And among the Muslims standing nearby is a man named Abu Hudayfa.
Yes. He is watching as the body of his own father is dragged toward the well.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. And the Prophet notices the distinct look of sorrow on Abu Hudayfa's face. He doesn't ignore it. He asks Abu Hudayfa directly if he is distressed about his father's fate.
And Abu Hudayfa's response is this profound moment of theological surrender.
It really is.
He speaks with deep respect, clarifying that he doesn't question the decree of the higher power. He accepts the outcome. But he explains that he had always known his father to be a man of keen intellect, good judgment, and reason.
Right.
And he had carried this quiet hope that his father's inherent goodness and logic would eventually lead him to recognize the truth.
And that moment exposes a fundamental truth about the nature of guidance. Intellect and reason, no matter how sharp, are not always enough to overcome deep-seated pride, societal pressure, or the arrogance of tradition.
Yeah.
Abu Hudayfa had to accept that he could not control the heart of the man he loved. And the Prophet himself bore this exact same pain regarding his beloved uncle Abu Talib.
Because Abu Talib raised him, protected him at the risk of his own life, and loved him dearly.
Yes, yet he died without ever accepting the truth of the message.
Meanwhile, you have men in the Quraysh army who violently persecuted the early Muslims. Men who seemed entirely lost to arrogance, who would later experience a complete transformation and become some of the most devoted followers.
It proves that you can present a truth clearly, but the ultimate turning of a heart rests entirely with a higher power. It requires a profound humility from the believers.
Right. They had to accept that their role was to stand firm, but the ultimate ledger of who is guided and who is lost is just not in their hands.
Exactly.
Which really brings us to the quiet, eerie aftermath of the encounter. The dust settles over the desert. The 300 have stood firm against the 1,000.
And the Prophet stands at the edge of that dry well,
looking down at the fallen leaders of the Quraysh who had tormented them for years.
Yeah. And he begins to speak directly to them. He addresses them by name and asks this piercing, definitive question.
Have you found what your Lord promised you to be true? For we have found what our Lord promised us to be true.
And a companion nearby is startled by this.
Well, yeah, he asked the obvious logistical question, why are you speaking to bodies that have no spirits?
And the Prophet's answer is chilling and absolute. He states the fallen hear him in that moment just as clearly as the living do. They simply cannot reply.
Wow.
It is the ultimate closure to the event. Badr stands as the definitive legacy, the ultimate criterion.
Right. It wasn't merely a tactical victory of a smaller force over a larger one.
No. It was the moment a line was irrevocably drawn in the sand between good and evil. It demonstrated that when human humility, disciplined unity, and an unwavering reliance on a higher destiny all align, they can shatter the physical manifestations of arrogance and tyranny.
As we step back from that well and out of the desert, I want to leave you with a thought to examine in your own life. Think about the massive, intimidating challenges you face.
The moments where you look at the math, the resources, or the opposition, and you realize you are hopelessly outnumbered.
Consider the times you are forced into an unexpected detour. much like a group intending to intercept a caravan, but finding an entire army instead.
Right, those moments that leave you feeling completely unequipped and vulnerable.
How often has what seemed like a terrifying disadvantage, the heavy rain turning your plans to mud, the sheer mismatch in resources, the frightening vulnerability of standing exposed, actually been the exact divinely orchestrated setup required for a victory you couldn't possibly have foreseen?
That's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is. Sometimes the very elements that seem designed to crush you are the ones firming the ground beneath your feet. Keep that in mind the next time you find yourself facing an army of 1,000, armed with nothing but your conviction. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.